the Mellotron Micro. I have to admit, I am not a person who's that excited about recreations of things, although you've even seen me demonstrate some. I mean, ultimately, the goal is to have the thing. That's why the thing is cool, is what it is. And that's why there are these duplications made that are like the thing. But you want the thing. I mean, ultimately, I don't know if you've ever played an actual Mellotron. I've only played an M400, I think. But it is an experience. When you play a Mellotron, you're pressing a key, and pressing the key engages a tape player. And a tape of the sound that you're playing is played. 8 seconds of tape. You press down this thing, 8 seconds of tape happens, and that's the sound. And it's true for every one of the keys, which is why the Mellotron is such a nightmare. It's that many tape recorders. I am not as up on Mellotrons as I am on other vintage instruments, but I don't know, there's probably 4 octaves on an M400, maybe something like that. That's a lot of tape players that have to be kept in working order. And every time you play a key, that's a piece of tape being pulled through. It's a monstrous concept. And, the concept initially, it's just like, that's the way that this can be done. That's how this will work, is if we do it that way. And so the actual mechanics of it are less important initially than what it was actually doing. And the concept behind it is the concept behind sampling to a degree, which I'll describe the differences. But initially, the idea is if you play a note on a violin and you make a tape of that and you put it on the key of that note, then a person can basically, quote, play a violin from a keyboard. And it's a great concept. Obviously, we've all been dealing with samplers for decades now, and we know that that's not necessarily true because you play a keyboard differently than you play a musical instrument. But with a little bit of knowledge of instruments and how they typically work, you can come up with suitable facsimiles. So the hilarious thing about the Mellotron Micro is that it is a duplication of an experience that is a duplication of an experience, which is to say that the original Mellotron is trying to fake being a violin or a flute or whatever. And so this Micro is a modern company's digital version of this instrument that was a analog tape version of a real instrument. So it's just, Anyway, it's just kind of amusing. But the fact of the matter is, the Mellotron is an amazing instrument, not only because it can help you make a facsimile of instruments that you typically couldn't play through a keyboard. And certainly at the time when the Mellotron was created, like if you wanted an orchestra, if you wanted orchestral sounds, you needed an orchestra. There was no getting around it. There was no way to get a string section without it being a string section until the Chamberlin or the Mellotron. The Chamberlin being the initial design that the Mellotron became part of. 2 different people, different companies, etc., but the concept's the same. Anyway, the point is, suddenly you could have a string section, whereas you had never had one. You would have to have a real string section to play. So the Mellotron was instrumental in the concept, like maybe we could have instruments that fake other instruments that allow you not to have to hire an entire orchestra and teach them apart in order to play a string line in a song or in a movie or something. It's a really cool idea. Of course, it puts musicians out of work, so that's terrible. In a way, this digital version puts the people who are still making real Mellotrons out of work, and that's terrible. It's a never-ending chain of terrible, but unfortunately and shamefully, we, the consumers, benefit in the sense that, if you can't tell, I've always thought the Mellotron was like a great great instrument that I would love to have and play. But the fact of the matter is, first of all, they're far too expensive. Second of all, they require constant maintenance. And I know people say that about analog synthesizers, but it's really not true. Some analog synthesizers require constant maintenance. Other ones they've been working for 40 years and they're still working, and that's all there is to it. I mean, obviously they need calibration or whatever, but it's not like the Mellotron where it's a mechanical situation that is touchy to begin with. And then, things can go wrong with your Mellotron just sitting there, especially as old as many of them are. So the point, though, is that I can now have those Mellotron sounds. Oh, and that's what I was going to say. The Mellotron sounds become important, not just because they sound like a string section or they sound like flutes or whatever, but because they are characteristic. After, like any sample, these things have been sampled. These violin sounds or whatever flute sounds have been recorded, and now they are a thing. So when you play them on the Mellotron, you start to recognize them. Like string sounds on the Mellotron. I hear songs even today that I'm like, oh, there's a Mellotron string section. It's because the character of that string part becomes definitive, like you recognize it, and then it becomes associated with music that you love. And then you want to not only have the coolness of the Mellotron, you not only want to have realistic string sounds, but you also want the string sounds that were used in a particular song. Because they sound cool and they sound different in your song, but you can still have that thrill, like these were used in this Moody Blues song or whatever. And it makes this thing really desirable, because it's not like, okay, gosh, if I were going to buy a Mini Moog, I'd have to, pay $7,000, but you could, and then you'd have a Mini Moog and then you could just play it. Getting a Mellotron is way worse than that. You have to get it. You have to maintain it. It's a huge thing. Then you have to have tape racks for it. I mean, it is not a thing that is easy to achieve for someone who isn't incredibly wealthy. And so in this way, this type of Mellotron becomes a benefit because it allows you and I know this is kind of the Behringer catchphrase or whatever, like, we'll bring you these expensive things for cheap, but like this is bringing something that's impossible to you, for all intents and purposes, if that makes any sense. And if it makes it sound like I'm just trying to make excuses for having a non-Mellotron, well, maybe. But anyway, since I have bought this thing, I have been insanely happy. It is so powerful, and it's basically the polyphonic keyboard I have always wanted. If I only could have this and never got to play a polyphonic synth again, I'd be sad about the Polybrute, but still, this makes polyphonic sounds that I really want. So I just wanted to have this introduction, which is just you basically watching me gesture over a keyboard, which is sad. I should have had a camera on my face. But I just wanted to have this introduction where I addressed these aspects of this company and this aspect of this particular instrument. The next video is going to be me actually talking about the functionality of this instrument. So let's go on to that.